So this verse is a very interesting verse from the Bhagavatam, because this verse actually explains the 10 topics of the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. So I thought we could read the translation, and then we can discuss something on this particular verse. So I'll just read it and then we go from there. Shri Shukuvacha, Atrasaga Visagascha Stanam Poshanam Utaya, Mamvantaisha Nukata Nirodo Muktiya Ashraya. Okay, Shri Shuka Uvacha, Shri Shukadev Goswami said, Atra in this Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Sagaha, statement of the creation of the universe, Visagaha, statement of subcreation, Cha, also, Stanam, the planetary systems, Poshanam, protection, Uttayaha, the creative impetus, Manvantara, changes of Manus, Ishanukata, the science of God, Nirodha, going back home, back to Godhead, Muktihi, liberation, Ashrayaha, the Sanam Bonam. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Sri Shukadev Goswami said in the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, there are 10 divisions of statements regarding the following: the creation of the universe, subcreation, planetary systems, protection by the Lord, the creative impetus, the change of Manus, the science of God, returning home back to Godhead, liberation, and the summon bonum. Okay, so I'll just say something about this very special verse, and then we can open up for some questions. So it is really the science of Krishna consciousness, as given to us by Srila Prabhupada, has so many fine points and so much deep levels of understanding. One of the most important and powerful things about the teachings is that they are coherent. That means that throughout the teachings, throughout the system of the teachings, you will find that one thing can relate to something else, that can relate to something else, that can relate to something else. And so it's like a great tapestry, or you could say like a great jigsaw puzzle, that one piece of the puzzle, you'll see how it fits with something else. And you'll see how that fits with some other subject, and that fits within a different topic. And all together, there's a saying that people have sometimes, that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. In the case of the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, because we know it is non-different from Krishna, it is Grantavatar, it is a literary incarnation of Krishna. Therefore, the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam actually has unlimited meaning. And the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam will give unlimited understanding and realization to devotees, depending on the sincerity of the devotee and the Lord's reciprocation based upon that sincerity. One of the things that I've been finding to be extraordinarily powerful is the ability to understand the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam by understanding some of the overarching principles, frameworks, or categories that are within the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. And so what I thought we'd do is go through some of the understanding here. So these 10 topics of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam are present throughout all the 12 cantos. We know that the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam is considered to be the Lord's body. And we know that within that Bhāgavatam, within the cantos, we know that the 10th canto is the Lord's smiling face. The 11th canto is his forehead. The 12th canto is his entire head, right? So we know that different parts of the body are also related to different parts of the Lord's body. Krishna's body are related to different cantos of the Bhāgavatam. There's also another way of looking at the Bhāgavatam, and this is called the Krama theory. And so Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur he explains how different topics from the 10 divisions of the Bhagavatam relate to different cantos. Now, there's also, interestingly enough, a different explanation given by Jiva Goswami. Right? So he says that all the different topics, all the different 10 topics of the Bhagavatam are present in all the cantos. So there's no contradiction. These different acharyas are explaining the Bhagavatam in different ways according to their different realizations. But yeah, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur uses what is called the Krama theory. And so I'll just explain what that means, but I'll begin by explaining that the first canto of Bhagavatam, it gives the methodology by which one can understand the Bhagavatam. So we hear in the beginning of the Bhagavatam how the Bhagavatam has been passed down. So Krishna gives the teachings of the Bhagavatam to Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma passes those teachings on to Narada Muni. Narada Muni gives those teachings to Vyasadeva. Vyasadeva explains those teachings to his son Shukadeva Goswami. Shukadeva Goswami speaks the Bhagavatam to Pariksit Maharaj. And in the conversation between Shukadeva Goswami and Maharaj Pariksit, we know that Suta Goswami is in the audience of those assembled to hear that conversation, because the sages come to hear that dialogue. And then later Suta Goswami will explain what he heard in that conversation to the sages of Naimisharanya. So this methodology of how to study the Bhagavatam, how to understand the Bhagavatam, is to understand it in a submissive mood, hearing from a qualified person or qualified persons. Specifically, two terms are given, Shushruta and Kriti Bihir. So Shushruta means to hear with humility. And to hear with humility, it actually means to hear with respect from the person who is sharing the Bhagavatam. So that's Shushruta. Kriti Bihir means to listen attentively, great eagerness to hear. So we see, or we understand from the first canto, that these different personalities who have heard the Bhagavatam, they've heard it with that mood. They've heard it with great respect for the speaker and great eagerness to hear. And because they had the proper mood, the proper receptivity, the proper respect, and they were hearing from a qualified person, the meaning of the Bhagavatam was understood by them and has entered into their hearts. Yeah? They have understood the Bhagavatam or the essence of the teachings, because it's unlimited. There's always more and more that can be understood. And then they have been able to pass that understanding on to others. So the first canto is giving that methodology, the methodology by which the Bhagavatam can be understood. Oftentimes we think it's about the speaker, but actually what is within our power is our sincerity of desire to hear that Bhagavatam. So that's first canto. The second canto is what is called sadhana tattva. So, well, let's say, yeah, it's about sadhana. So in the second canto, Shukadeva Goswami, he's speaking about many different types of sadhana, but he will really go on to explain that the bhakti yoga, the sadhana of hearing about Krishna, that is the highest of all the different sadhanas. And then from the third canto onwards, we have these 10 topics of Bhagavatam. So canto 3 is saga, the primary creation. Canto 4 is visaga, the secondary creation. Canto 5 is stanam. Stanam, so here it says the planetary systems. So in the 5th canto Bhagavatam, you'll hear about the different planetary systems, the hellish planets, etc. Stanam also means the structure of the universe. And so in the 5th canto, it's really about helping us to understand how the universe is structured. And it's to help us to understand actually our position. Right? It's to help us to understand our position in the universe. What is our position? So for example, Sthanam also relates to this idea of being well situated so that you can understand the Supreme Lord. Okay, so Saga, Visaga, Sthanam. So that's the 5th canto. 6th canto is Poshanam. So here Prabhupada says protection. So it's really important when we read the Bhagavatam to understand how the Lord has protected his devotees. And when we understand how the Lord has protected his devotees, it will help us to understand that we will be protected. And that protection, if you, just like in a good family, the parents protect the children. And what does that do? When the child grows up in an environment where they were protected, they feel secure. It crystallizes their sense of security, and that security makes that particular child confident in their dealings in the world. So there's a natural connection between poshan and protection and security and confidence. So 6th canto is poshan. 7th canto is Uttaya, Uti, actually, sometimes it's said Uti, which is to do with the, actually, I'll come back to that because I had some notes on that, but I'll go on. Anyway, I'll go to 8th canto, Manvanta. 8th canto, in the 8th canto, we hear the story of Bali Maharaj, for example. In the 8th canto, it talks about the different manus, who are the different rulers. And it is also explained that the different manus, they are engaging in sad dharma. There's two levels of dharma. One is worldly dharma, but there's also an eternal dharma. So when the great rulers, when the manus run the world, run the creation, what are they doing? They are establishing dharmic rulership, and they are then making sure that everyone is engaged in their proper occupation. And the eternal occupation, the sad dharma, the sanatana dharma of every living entity is to do what? Jiva Sarupaya Krishna and Nitya Das. Sad dharma means engaging in Krishna consciousness. So that is the subject matter of the 8th canto, which is to do with Manvanta. Canto 9, Ishanukata, which is to do with, so Ishanukata means the pastimes of the Lord, actually. So it says the science of God, it also means the pastimes of the Lord. So the entire Bhagavatam as a whole is dealing with what? The glorification of the Lord and his devotees. So 9th canto deals with this Ishanukata. Now then, it takes a slightly different order. The 10th canto deals with the Sanambonam. So in the 10th canto, we have Krishna specifically and his Leelas in Vrindavan, so Vraj Leela. So the 10th canto is really introducing us specifically, not just different incarnations of the Lord, because throughout the other cantos, we hear about different incarnations, but 10th canto has a specific focus on Krishna and his pastimes with his devotees. So Ashraya. Ashraya also means the shelter, supreme shelter. So that's 10th canto. 11th canto is Nirodha. So here it says, going back home, back to Godhead, it also means the dissolution, the winding down of creation. And 12th canto is Mukti, liberation. So why do we share this, and why is this such an interesting framework to understand? It's because as we want to study the scripture, you can also see that each particular canto can be considered according to this particular framework, Krama theory by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. We can also consider that each canto has a particular theme and a particular understanding that it is trying to bring across to us as living entities. And so it's very, very interesting to study the Bhagavatam, or actually even to study scripture generally from this perspective, that nothing is accidental, and that the entire teachings, each canto has a particular overarching theme. And when we understand that, we can see everything else through the lens of that particular, let's say, a framework. When we do this, one of the benefits is that we can see all the different pastimes and activities going on, and we can again link it back to a particular, to a particular topic in that particular sense. So these are just some thoughts on the idea that the scripture itself carries certain categories or certain categories or structures around it that you can use to hang, certain understandings too. I'm just going to ask if we can be muted. Okay, so this is the idea that within the teachings, and there's many different frameworks. This is just one. This is the 10 topics which are throughout the Bhagavatam. Another way that we sometimes understand the scriptures is through the modes. We know that there are 18 Puranas. There are 6 for those in the mode of ignorance, 6 Puranas for those in the mode of passion. We know that there are 6 Puranas in the mode of goodness as well. So there are different ways in which we can categorize the scripture. And there's a term called Shastra Yukti. And what this means is that when we study the teachings and we try to understand where everything fits, what fits with what. So, okay, this topic fits in this way with this topic. Then what it does is it also helps us to become more, clear in our understanding of the teachings. It helps us to almost like put the teachings together like a jigsaw puzzle. Now, of course, when no one's expecting us to do this over like immediately, it's something that we just start to pick up. And I'll just give you one example before we open for questions. So I was reflecting on this point, and I heard this point in that class about the 3rd canto of Bhagavatam. And so in the 3rd canto of Bhagavatam, we see a very interesting contrast between 2 couples. I was just thinking about the class that Marge gave recently, 3rd canto, chapter 24, text number 15. And Marge was giving the class on the verse, and Chandramauli Marge was giving the class on the verse and on the purport. So in that same 3rd canto, Bhagavatam, we see an amazing contrast. So the contrast is between 2 couples. You have Diti and Kasyapa Muni. So that's one contrast. What happens in their union? Okay, so Diti, Diti actually seduces her husband. So she wants to have union. He tells her this is not the right time, but she decides that still she would like to have that union. And he gives in. And so in the Bhagavatam, it explains that the son will have the mentality of the mother, and the daughter will have the mentality of the father. So when Diti seduces her husband Kasyapa Muni, and they have union, but at the wrong time, at the time which is inauspicious, then she has come to him for union, but with a very strong enjoying mood. Now, of course, he's also given in, but because she has that enjoying mood, the son that's born of that union between Diti and Kasyapa Muni is Hiranyaksha. Hiranyaksha, the name means golden eyes. It means one who sees gold, one who's looking for that gold all the time. He is the personification of greed. So through that desire to just enjoy, they give birth to a son who's the personification of greed, who's actually a demon in that sense. So that's one example in the 3rd canto. And that contrasts very, very strongly with another couple in the 3rd canto. Candramauli and Devahuti. So Candramauli is a sage. Devahuti is the daughter of a great, leader, king, right? So I am Bhuva, and she is betrothed, or she's given to Candramauli. And what happens there? She serves in a very, very humble and sincere way. And because of that, Candramauli, he has this mystic ability. He can manifest certain things. So he manifests this great palace, flying palace. And through their union, she gives birth to, let's see, I keep forgetting the name of the, she gives birth to an incarnation of God. Remind me the name of the child who's born of
Kapila Prabhuji.
Exactly, thank you. Kapila Muni, who's actually an incarnation of the Lord himself, right? Kapila Dev. So you could see here a very, very strong contrast between the approaches of the couples, especially the ladies in terms of the husband, and also the child that is born of that particular union as well. And I'm just sharing this because as you go through the Bhagavatam, as we go deeper and deeper into the Bhagavatam, more and more we will see these amazing parallels, these amazing contrasts between different personalities, different characters. And it's very deliberate because the Bhagavatam, through the pages of the Bhagavatam, we're able to see different types of human behavior, different types of interaction, and the long-term outcomes of those different behaviors and interactions. It is literally an encyclopedia of the human condition. It is explaining different personality types, how they behave, and what happened to them as a result of such behavior. And as we deeply go into hearing about, reflecting on these pastimes within the Bhagavatam, they become literally different examples of how to respond in all the different types of human conditions or human situations that we may find ourselves in. How we can respond such that we can mold our life in such a way that we can progress on the journey of coming closer to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. So we really wanted to share some of these considerations, just to throw this out as a beginning for some conversation or discussion. I know we have about just under 20 minutes. So I thought we'd stop there and just see if you have any questions based upon any of the points that we shared so far.
Hare Krishna, thank you Prabhuji for the nice class. Can you just little elaborate on 7th canto? I think you just thought that you'll come back on it again.
Yes. So yes, let's go back to the, if you could put the
verse again. Yeah.
The verse again, yes. Please. So, Saga Visaga Stanam, Poshanam Uti. So in the 7th canto, yeah, it says the creative impetus. In this, actually, let me just see if I can get my notes up. Actually, so the 1st canto is Adhikari Tattva. I think I may have used the wrong term, but the 1st canto is Adhikari Tattva, which is that methodology about how we can actually get the best or get the real benefit from the Bhagavatam. So that's one point. And then let's just find specifics. I'm gonna have to come back on that because I have to find my specific notes on that 7th canto. But yeah, as I said, the karma theory really relates to all of these to this particular area, to Uti, which is the creative impetus. In the 7th canto, we do hear about the story of Prahlad Maharaj. And in the 7th canto, we see in Prahlad Maharaj's example, what it means to be a pure, unalloyed devotee of the Lord, who is, whose only motive, that's it, because Uti can also mean impetus to act. That was it. So we see how his only motive was to actually engage in pure devotional service in the limbs of bhakti. And his motive or impetus to act was so strong that even in the face of various opportunities or various, let's say, not opportunities, various attempts by his father to kill him, actually, he was able to maintain his devotion to the Lord. And ultimately, at a particular point, the Lord himself in the form of Nishingadev came to give direct protection to Prahlad Maharaj. So we know the pastime that eventually his father will say, is your Lord in this pillar? And Prahlad Maharaj says, yes, actually. And then Hiranyakashipu smashes the pillar. And Lord Nishingadev appears and he kills Hiranyakashipu. And he kills him actually in such a way that he maintains the boon that Hiranyakashipu had been given by Lord Brahma. He will not be killed on, he would not be killed by an animal or a human in the daytime or the nighttime, on the land, etc. He gives so many different things. But yeah, this sense of impetus or the motivation to act, you could say, this is in one sense displayed very powerfully by Prahlad Maharaj, because his motivation to serve under all circumstances is absolutely unbreakable. So we could say in that sense, it relates to that. Okay, Uti. Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Devotees, if you have any questions or comments or realizations, please go ahead.
Are there any questions or comments that anyone has?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, thank you so much for your class. When we're reading Bhagavatam and the topics that you mentioned, I don't necessarily connect to those topics while I'm reading them. Is it something that you have to be conscious of, or does it happen automatically?
It tends not to happen automatically, and you don't have to necessarily correlate. I'm just pointing out that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he does actually connect the different topics of the Bhagavatam to different cantos. At the same time, it is explained that every canto has all the different topics, but what Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is doing is pointing out that there may be a particular prominence of a particular theme of the Bhagavatam to a particular canto of the Bhagavatam. So it's not something you need to worry about. I just thought it would be interesting to share. And the reason why I found it useful is because then when I was reading the particular canto, I could understand more about how some of the different things in the canto relate to a particular theme of the Bhagavatam. That was all. So it's the underlying point is that when we go to learn something, it's often easier to learn something if you've got something to hang it on to, right? So think of your mind like a house, okay? So in the house, you have different places. You have a kitchen, you have a living room, you have a bedroom, you have a bathroom. So when you're moving house, let's say you have a box, and then in the box, you can see that there are kitchen appliances, there's a blender, there's a microwave. You know, okay, that stuff belongs in the kitchen, right? So you know that you can relate these items, you know immediately where to put it, yeah? So in the same way, sometimes by understanding the 10 topics of the Bhagavatam, when you read different things, you know, oh, okay, this all relates to this particular theme, just like the theme's like a room, and all the different things that you're reading are like the items, yeah? Otherwise, sometimes people read the Bhagavatam and there's so much there, right? You're hearing about this devotee, that devotee, you know, this incarnation, that incarnation, and you think, oh, wow, there's a lot here. So one of the reasons why I found this to be useful is because when we read a certain canto, we can think of it in relation to a certain theme, if we wish to, right? But you're not tied to it. So I just thought it would be an interesting thing to share. Yeah.
Yes, that does make sense. Thanks. Thanks for clarifying.
Okay, no worries. So I saw a question by Kushbu. Is it okay to answer that question?
Yes, yes, Prabhuji. Yeah.
Okay, so Hare Krishna, can you please suggest some tips on how to read the Bhagavatam? I've read it once, but wanted to reread it, but go deeper. Yeah, there's so many ways in which we can study the Bhagavatam. So sometimes it's suggested that at first, if you want to get, you may want to just get an overview of a particular canto. So what some devotees do as they're studying, let's say they want to study the first canto, they may begin by just reading the verses. And by reading the verses, they know roughly what's happening in the actual Bhagavatam, like first canto itself in terms of the narrative, right? So they know, okay, so they just read all the verses and they can hear, okay, there's a conversation going on, etc., etc., etc. And then having done that, then they'll read it again, but this time they'll read the verses and the purport. So they know what the narrative is. And now what they're hearing as they read is Prabhupada elaborating and expanding on these particular verses. So when you read the verses, you have the text. When you read the verses with Prabhupada's purports, you have the text plus the context, right? So you know what's going on, and Prabhupada is giving also what we call the subtext. He's giving the meaning behind each of these particular verses. And then also, I found it can be very powerful to study the Bhagavatam with a friend, right? Because it's such a big text that when you study it with friends, then you start to really start to get into the, what's the word? You start to get into the different angles of vision. I shared with some devotees today, there was a podcast, Chaitanya Charan, it's called the Monk Podcast. And it's a conversation between Chaitanya Charan, Krishna Dharma, and his wife Chintamani. And it's on the topic of studying the Shastra from different angles of vision. And I thought it was incredible. To be honest with you, it's incredibly interesting conversation and discussion. And so what they're really talking about is that when we study the Bhagavatam in association of devotees, we'll read the verse in purport, and then we can ask each other, what stood out for you? You see? And so one person will say, yeah, I saw this was really interesting. And what stood out for me was that Prabhupada was saying this. And someone else will say, yeah, I thought what was very interesting in the purport by Prabhupada or in the verse is that this is coming out. And it reminds me of this other point. So when you study the Bhagavatam like that in discussion, you're reading the verse, you're reading the purport, and then you're discussing with other devotees what stood out for you, why, how it relates to other things that you've read and heard. It can be an incredibly satisfying and moreover, a transformative experience as well. So Kushbu, that's one way you can study. Another way you can study is you can look at a particular topic, right? So let's say I want to understand more about the mind. And so I've read the Bhagavatam, and now I'm going to read I'm going to look at, the index and look, and where are the references in this canto about the mind, right? Someone else may think, I want to, I'm going to study Bhagavatam. So I want to look at what Prabhupada says about chanting Hare Krishna mantra. So they're looking at the Bhagavatam, but from the point of view of a specific subject matter that they want to study more about. That could be another way of studying. So there's a few different ways, right? Another way is that you read the verse, you read the purport, and you make notes on different things that stood out to you. Some people even study the Bhagavatam based upon particular issues that they're facing in their life, and they want to understand more. What does Prabhupada say about that? Of course, that should be done after you've actually read it sequentially. So we don't jump to a thematic study. We first make sure we read the entire thing systematically in its sequential order, but there's also these other angles at which you can look into the Bhagavatam. I also find, there's an overview of the Bhagavatam by Sutapa. That can be very, very useful because and there's also one by there's one called Bhagavat Subodhini. So you may, and then there's also the unveiling his lotus feet, the Bhagavatam overview by Burijan Prabhu. So another way to study the Bhagavatam is to read an overview first. Let's say you want to study the first canto. So you've read it already, which is good. So you should read the whole thing through, the whole Bhagavatam. But then you may think, okay, let me look at the overview of the first canto. So I read that first, and then I go through the first canto again, connected to the overview of it, because then it will bring out more and more of the detail and the connections between the different things. And you can do it with someone that you know, a friend, another devotee, and it can be, I tell you honestly, it can be incredibly relishable. It's so incredible because the Bhagavatam, every time you study the Bhagavatam, you're in direct contact with Krishna. And what transforms us and changes us is the contact with Krishna in the form of his holy name, in the form of the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. The more we do it, the more sincerely we do it, the more attentively we do it, the more we become purified. So yeah, those are some ideas. Yeah. Thank you for your question, Kushbu. Maybe we have time for one last question before I'll need to leave for another appointment.
Sudha Mataji.
Sudha?
Oh, sorry, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare
Krishna, Dhanvat Pranam, Prabhuji. Yeah, you. Sorry, all glories to, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to Guru Maharaj. Thank you for the very nice class. Thank you, Prabhuji. This really helps me so much. Understanding 10 topics is very important. Because I read, I feel like it's more mechanical, but today's this lecture, it really helped me to how to actually read and how to see Bhagavatam. So Prabhuji, I have a question about I really like, see day to day we face so many challenges and want to really apply the Krishna consciousness when we actually go through those challenges. And I like the contrast which you gave, like Dehahuti and Kadamba Muni and those things, how sense gratification is so dangerous and that leads to a problem. So Prabhuji, I have a question. Yesterday's class, like you mentioned, sometimes we are just working for paying bills to maintain roof on the top and trying to practice Krishna consciousness. But when we actually have these kind of disturbances, it's very hard to actually focus on Krishna consciousness and follow and do our devotional service. Scenarios like this, we come across daily. So could you please explain how we can relate this kind of situations, in the Bhagavatam and apply those?
Yes. Yeah. The Bhagavatam is full of those situations of challenges. Let's think about this. You have the Pandavas, right? The Pandavas are mentioned in the Bhagavatam. They have all the intrigues that they face, so many attempts to kill them, by Duryodhan, by the Kauravas, and then it ultimately turns into a war, etc., like the Battle of Kurukshetra. So they have challenges. You have the challenges that we see, as we mentioned, with Prahlad Maharaj. Demoniac father, so many attempts by his demoniac father to kill him. We have the pastime of Bali Maharaj. He's actually tricked. He's tricked by Vamanadev. And Vamanadev actually, he takes 3 steps, he takes everything. But what's also interesting is before Vamanadev tricks Bali Maharaj, you have the battle between the demons and the devas, right? The demigods, and the demigods are losing. So Indra's losing, and Indra's wants to know, and they want to understand why. How is it that this Bali Maharaj is so powerful? And it's explained that this is in the 8th canto, chapter 15, text number 28, that because Bali Maharaj has been blessed by the descendants of Bhrigu, right, the Brahmana descendants of Bhrigu, therefore he becomes so powerful. And in the purport, Prabhupada says that it's the mercy of the spiritual master that makes one advance, basically. And that mercy is more important than one's own endeavor to make advancement. So the key point we should understand is that we all have our battle of Kurukshetra. As people trying to make advancement, we will all have different challenges. But if we read and study the Bhagavatam, what we're really reading and studying is how many different devotees through different challenging situations were able to become victorious. And if we remember that, then we remember their example, even their example will give us inspiration that Krishna will always protect his devotee. Name Bhaktya Pranasyati, Krishna says that in Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna declare it boldly that my devotee shall never perish. And then on top of that, to make it applicable to our present day situation, through the discussions with devotees, we can look at these pastimes and think, what am I meant to learn? How do I apply this understanding? For example, we see when Maharaj Pariksit is cursed to die, what does he do? He goes towards the association of Shukadev Goswami, and he says, what is a person meant to do when he's about to die? So the inquiry process is reinforced through the example, through the pastimes. What we're meant to do in situations of difficulty is submissively inquire from the devotees in order to get the advice that we need to be successful. And we see this also is mentioned in a different way in the Nectar of Instruction. 6 loving exchanges include revealing the mind and inquiring confidentially about Krishna. That means inquiring confidentially that given our circumstances, how can I continue to make progress to achieve the goal of Krishna consciousness?
Okay. So thank you, Prabhuji. So situations like that, because I mean, I'm very neophyte, usually, definitely if you read, they are very self-realized souls, but as you said, like when we come across these situations, we have to inquire submissively and try to apply it.
Yes, in our own lives. Yes, inquiring. Look, we can also study the scriptures to see how did great devotees deal with different challenges. And we see, for example, they kept equipoise. They didn't start like losing their temper and anger and frustration. They were very equipoised. They took shelter of other devotees, right? We see that also. They inquired from other devotees to get advice on how to navigate challenges. I'll end on this point because I'm gonna have to go, but one of the things that Maya tries to make us do is to make our mind our guru. So what Maya tries to do when people have difficulty, they rather than consulting with Guru Sadhu Shastra, they just do whatever their mind says. Now, if your mind is pure like Prabhupada, that's fine. If the mind is backed up by pure scripture, that's fine. But if the mind is still conditioned, we should also not necessarily just take the mind's dictation as correct. We should make sure that the mind is in line with what we're hearing from our teachers, from Guru Sadhu Shastra, in order to make sure that we can progress properly. Yeah? Okay.
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much. Definitely mind takes over most of the time. Yeah.
Okay, so forgive me, but I'll have to stop now.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji.